How can one reckless decision lead to a life-changing delivery at your own front door? What if, after months of believing I deserved more, I found myself facing the wife of the man I thought was mine, while my own husband served me divorce papers? Before you judge, let me tell you how I ended up here, with my world unraveling in front of everyone. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Ottilie Vance, and I used to believe I was a good person. I worked as an HR assistant at Morrison & Associates, lived in a tidy suburban home with my husband Martin and our 11-year-old daughter Ella. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but perfection, I learned, can feel like a prison. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. Martin had already left for his accounting firm, leaving behind the usual: coffee grounds scattered across the counter, his breakfast plate in the sink, and that suffocating silence that had become our normal. Ella sat at the kitchen table, picking at her cereal while scrolling through her phone. "Mum, can I stay at Grandma Glory's this weekend?" she asked without looking up. "Why would you want to do that?" I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. Ella shrugged. "I don't know. It's just quieter there." Quieter, as if our home was some kind of war zone. But wasn't it? Martin and I barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it was about bills, schedules, or Ella's school events. When had we stopped being a couple and become just roommates? At work that morning, I found myself staring at my computer screen, unable to focus on the employee handbook revisions that were due by noon. The office buzzed with its usual energy, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. But I felt disconnected from it all, like I was watching life happen through glass. "You look like you need a vacation," said a voice behind me. I turned to see Simon Redding, the new marketing consultant who'd been working with our firm for the past month. He was leaning against my cubicle wall, coffee in hand, wearing that easy smile that made everyone in the office stop and look. "Don't we all?" I replied, trying to sound casual, while my heart did something embarrassing. "Seriously though, you seem stressed. Everything okay at home?" The question caught me off guard. When was the last time Martin had asked me that? When was the last time anyone had asked me that? "Just the usual suburban mum stuff," I said, forcing a laugh. "Nothing too exciting." "Well, if you ever want to grab coffee and complain about the usual suburban mum stuff, I'm a pretty good listener." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring at his business card that he'd somehow slipped onto my desk. Simon Redding, Marketing Solutions. His personal cell number was written on the back in blue ink. That evening, Martin came home at his usual time, 6:47 p.m., like clockwork. He kissed my cheek, the same perfunctory peck he'd been giving me for years, and asked about my day while rifling through the mail. "Fine," I said, watching him sort bills into neat piles. "Same as always." "That's good," he replied, not really listening. "Ella, how was school?" Our daughter launched into a story about her science project, while Martin nodded and made appropriate sounds. He was a good father. I had to give him that. But when had he stopped being a good husband? Or had I stopped being a good wife? After dinner, while Martin helped Ella with her homework, I found myself in our bedroom, staring at Simon's business card. Before I could talk myself out of it, I saved his number in my phone under Simon Work. The first text was innocent enough. "Thanks for listening today. Sometimes it's nice to know someone cares." His response came within minutes. "Everyone deserves to feel heard. How about that coffee tomorrow?" I should have said no. I should have deleted his number and focused on fixing whatever was broken between Martin and me. Instead, I typed, "Sounds perfect." The next morning, Martin was particularly chatty over breakfast, telling me about a new client and asking if I wanted to go out for dinner that weekend. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. He was trying, wasn't he? But then he checked his phone mid-sentence, responding to what was probably a work email, and the moment passed. This was exactly the problem. Even when he was present, he wasn't really present. Actually, I might have to work late tomorrow night, I lied smoothly. Big project deadline. Oh, okay. Maybe next weekend then. He didn't even look disappointed. At lunch, I met Simon at a small coffee shop downtown, far enough from the office that we wouldn't run into colleagues. He was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window in a navy sweater that made his eyes look impossibly blue. I wasn't sure you'd show up, he said, standing to pull out my chair. Why wouldn't I? Married woman, meeting a strange man for coffee. Some people might talk. The way he said it made my pulse quicken. Are you strange? Definitely, but in a good way, I hope. We talked for 2 hours, about work, about books, about dreams we'd put on hold. He told me about his travels through Europe, the photography business he'd always wanted to start, the way he felt trapped by expectations and responsibilities. I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone in years, how I'd wanted to be a teacher, how I felt invisible in my own life, how I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly happy. You're too young to feel invisible, he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Someone like you should be celebrated every day. When was the last time Martin had said anything like that to me? When was the last time he'd really looked at me, not just glanced up from his phone or computer? That evening, Martin noticed my mood. You seem different, good different, happy. I felt a stab of guilt mixed with defiance. I had a nice day at work. Is that so unusual? No, of course not. I'm glad. You've seemed stressed lately. If he'd really been paying attention, he would have known I'd been more than stressed. I'd been drowning, and he'd been too busy organizing his sock drawer and balancing his checkbook to notice. Over the next few weeks, my coffee dates with Simon became regular occurrences. We texted throughout the day. Nothing inappropriate, just friendly conversations that made me feel alive again. He asked about my dreams, my opinions, my feelings. He made me laugh. He made me feel seen. At home, the contrast became more stark. Martin's routine never varied. Up at 6:30, shower, coffee, work, home by 6:47, dinner, help Ella with homework, watch the news, bed by 10:30. Weekends were for grocery shopping, yard work, and visiting his mother Glory, who had never really warmed to me despite 15 years of marriage. You're on your phone a lot lately, Martin observed one evening as I responded to a text from Simon. Work stuff, I said, not looking up. At 9 p.m. Some of us don't have the luxury of leaving work at work. It was unfair, and I knew it. Martin worked hard to provide for us, but I was tired of feeling grateful for being ignored. The turning point came on a Friday night in April. Martin had fallen asleep on the couch watching a documentary about tax law, actually fallen asleep, and I was alone in our bedroom, texting with Simon. I wish I could see you this weekend, he wrote. Me too, but family obligations. What if we weren't just texting? My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you mean? I have a place downtown, quiet, private. We could just talk, really talk. I stared at the message for a long time. This was the line. Once I crossed it, there would be no going back. Downstairs, Martin snored softly on the couch, the remote still in his hand. Ella was at a sleepover. I was 34 years old, and I felt like my life was over. Send me the address, I typed. I deleted the message thread as soon as I heard Martin's footsteps on the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. But he just kissed my forehead and mumbled something about an early morning at the office. Good night, honey, he said, already half asleep. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, knowing that everything was about to change. Saturday afternoon found me standing outside Simon's apartment building, my hands shaking as I checked my reflection in the lobby's glass doors. I told Martin I was going shopping with my friend Sharon. a lie that came so easily it scared me. The apartment was on the 4th floor, modern and minimally furnished. Simon answered the door in jeans and a white button-down, looking effortlessly handsome in a way that Martin never seemed to manage anymore. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, stepping aside to let me in. Neither was I. The space was nothing like our cluttered family home. Everything was clean lines and neutral colors, no family photos or children's artwork on the refrigerator. It felt like a different world, one where I could be someone other than Martin's wife or Ella's mother. "Wine," he offered. "It's 3 in the afternoon." "Is that a no?" I laughed despite my nerves. "That's a yes." We sat on his couch, talking like we always did, but the atmosphere was charged with possibility. He told me more about his photography, showing me pictures on his laptop, landscapes from his travels, street photography from the city. They were beautiful, artistic in a way that made me feel sophisticated just by looking at them. "You're really talented," I said, leaning closer to see the screen. "You think so? My ex always said it was a waste of time." "Your ex was an idiot." He turned to look at me, and suddenly we were very close. "Oh, Tilly." "Don't," I whispered. "Don't say anything that will make me think too hard about this." When he kissed me, it was nothing like the routine pecks I got from Martin. This was desperate, hungry, like we were both drowning and had found air in each other. I thought about Martin, probably at home organizing his files, or watching golf, completely unaware that his wife was falling apart in another man's arms. Afterward, lying in Simon's bed while he traced patterns on my shoulder, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror. "I should go," I said, not moving. "Should you?" "My family. Your family doesn't appreciate what they have." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Martin took me for granted. He always had. When was the last time he'd looked at me the way Simon was looking at me now? When was the last time he'd made me feel beautiful, desired, important? Over the following weeks, I became expert at deception. I started working late more often, meeting Simon at his apartment or small restaurants across town. I bought new lingerie, told Martin it was because I was feeling better about myself. I started going to a gym, or at least, that's what I told him. Really, I was spending those hours with Simon, learning to feel alive again. The guilt was there, but it was overshadowed by something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Every text from Simon made my heart race. Every stolen hour felt like a gift I was finally giving myself after years of selfless devotion to a husband who barely noticed me, and a daughter who was growing up whether I paid attention or not. "You're different lately," my friend Sharon observed over lunch one Tuesday. "Happier." Sharon had never liked Martin. She thought he was boring, too focused on stability and not enough on passion. She'd been divorced twice, and always said I was too good for suburban mediocrity. "I've just been thinking about what I want out of life," I said carefully. "And what's that?" "More than what I have." Sharon raised an eyebrow. "Is there someone else?" I must have blushed because she leaned forward with interest. "There is. Tell me everything." "It's not. We're not." "Honey, you're glowing. Either you're pregnant or you're having an affair. And since you've been complaining about your sex life for years, I'm guessing it's not pregnancy." So I told her, not everything, but enough. About Simon, about how he made me feel, about how dead my marriage had become. "Good for you," she said firmly. "Life is short. You deserve to be happy." "But Ella deserves a happy mother, not a bitter one. And Martin, honestly, he'll probably be relieved. He can focus on his precious spreadsheets without having to pretend to care about your feelings." It was harsh, but wasn't it also true? Martin seemed perfectly content with our arrangement. He had his work, his routines, his mother's approval. Did he really need a wife, or just someone to manage the household and show up to company parties? That evening, I looked at him across the dinner table as he helped Ella with her math homework, and I felt nothing. No love, no guilt, no connection. just a vague recognition that this man had once meant something to me, in another lifetime, when I was a different person with smaller dreams. "Mum, are you okay?" Ella asked. "You look sad." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." Martin glanced up. "Maybe you should take some time off. You've been working a lot of late nights." If only he knew what those late nights really involved. "I'm fine," I repeated. "Just a busy time at work." But I wasn't fine. I was falling in love with Simon, and every day it became harder to pretend that my marriage was anything more than a comfortable lie we were all telling ourselves. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in May. I was getting ready to meet Simon when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Ottilie Vance?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Helen Redding. I think we need to talk." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone with a growing sense of dread. Redding. That was Simon's last name. I called him immediately. "Simon, who is Helen Redding?" Silence on the other end. "Simon? Where did you hear that name?" "She just called me. Who is she?" More silence. Then, "We need to talk, but not tonight. I'll call you tomorrow." He hung up, leaving me standing in my bedroom with my heart pounding and my carefully constructed fantasy beginning to crumble around me. Downstairs, Martin was loading the dishwasher with his usual methodical precision. Ella was in the living room, working on a school project. "I'm not feeling well," I called out. "I'm going to skip my workout tonight." "Do you want me to make you some tea?" Martin asked, genuine concern in his voice. For a moment, I almost broke down and told him everything. Almost confessed and begged for forgiveness, and promised to be a better wife. Almost. Instead, I said, "No, I'm fine. Just need to rest." But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Martin's steady breathing beside me, I knew that everything was about to change, and for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Helen Redding turned out to be a woman about my age, with calm brown eyes and the kind of understated elegance that comes from genuine confidence rather than expensive clothes. We met at a coffee shop downtown, not the same one where Simon and I had our first lunch, but close enough to feel like a violation of sacred space. She was already seated when I arrived, hands folded around a ceramic mug, looking like she had all the time in the world. I, on the other hand, had barely slept and felt like I might throw up. "Ottilie," she said as I approached. It wasn't a question. "Helen." I sat down across from her, my hands trembling slightly. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "Has there?" She tilted her head slightly. "You've been sleeping with my husband for 2 months. What exactly am I misunderstanding?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Husband. Simon was married. All those conversations about his ex, about being lonely, about finding someone who understood him. Lies. All of it. "I didn't know," I whispered. "Didn't you?" Her voice remained perfectly calm. "Did you ask? Did you wonder why he never took you anywhere public? Why he was always available during business hours but never on weekends? Why you'd never been to his real home?" Each question was like a scalpel, cutting through the romantic narrative I'd built around our relationship. Simon's apartment, was it even his? The careful scheduling, the secrecy I'd thought was exciting and necessary. It had all been about hiding me from his real life. "He told me he was single," I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. "And you wanted to believe him, so you did." Helen took a sip of her coffee. "I'm not here to destroy you, Ottilie. I'm here to tell you that it's over. Simon won't be contacting you anymore. He's been transferred to our Chicago office, effective immediately. You can't just..." "I can. I did." For the first time, steel entered her voice. "I'm also here to suggest that you focus on your own marriage before you lose that too." She stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ottilie, Simon isn't the first affair I've dealt with. He's a serial cheater, and you're not special. You're just convenient." I sat in that coffee shop for another hour after she left, staring at my untouched latte and trying to process what had just happened. Simon was married. He'd lied to me about everything, and somehow I was the villain in this story. My phone buzzed with a text from Sharon. "How's the romance going? Still glowing?" Instead of responding, I drove to her house. "You look terrible," she said, opening her front door. "What happened?" I told her everything. About Helen, about Simon being married, about the way my perfect affair had just imploded in my face. "What a bastard," Sharon said, refilling our wine glasses. "But honestly, honey, maybe this is for the best. You were getting in pretty deep. I loved him. You loved the idea of him. There's a difference." She sat back down beside me on her couch. "The question now is, what are you going to do about Martin?" That was the question, wasn't it? I could go home, confess everything, beg for forgiveness and try to rebuild my marriage. Or I could... What? I'd already crossed so many lines that I wasn't sure there was a way back. "I don't know if I can just go back to the way things were," I admitted. "Then don't. You said it yourself. You deserve more than what you have. Simon was a lying piece of garbage, but that doesn't mean your marriage is suddenly worth saving." She had a point. Just because Simon had turned out to be a fraud didn't erase all the problems in my marriage. Martin was still the same inattentive husband he'd always been. I was still the same invisible wife. That evening, I came home to find Martin and Ella watching a movie together on the couch. They looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I saw us as strangers might, a happy family, cozy and content. "How was your workout?" Martin asked. "Fine," I said automatically. "You've been going a lot lately. You must be getting really fit." If he only knew what kind of workout I'd actually been getting. "Mum, want to watch with us?" Ella asked. "It's that movie about the talking dogs." "I'm tired. I think I'll go to bed." "It's only 8:30, Martin said, checking his watch with that concerned expression he got when something disrupted his sense of order. "I have a headache." Upstairs, I lay in our bed and stared at the ceiling. My phone was silent. No text from Simon, no calls, nothing. It was like he'd never existed. 2 months of my life, 2 months of lies and stolen moments, and the best sex I'd had in years, and now there was just... nothing. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions at work, at home, in all the places where I was expected to be. But inside, I felt hollow. Not because I missed Simon, though I did, despite everything, but because I was right back where I started, trapped in a life that felt too small for me. "You've been quiet lately," Martin observed one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Have I? Is everything okay? Work stress?" I looked at him, really looked at him, probably for the first time in months. He was a good man, stable, reliable, devoted to our family. But he was also boring, predictable, safe, and I was tired of safe. "I think we need to talk," I heard myself say. "Okay." He set down the dish towel and gave me his full attention. "What about?" "About us, about our marriage, about whether we're both just going through the motions." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "Are we? Going through the motions?" "Aren't we? When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time we did anything spontaneous or exciting or alive?" "I thought you liked our routine. You always said you appreciated stability after your chaotic childhood." He was right. I had said that. But that was before I remembered what it felt like to have someone look at me like I was the most fascinating person in the room. "Maybe I've changed," I said. "Okay, so what do you want to do about it?" It was such a Martin response. Practical, solution-oriented, missing the emotional core of what I was trying to tell him. "I don't know," I said, and that was the truth. Over the following week, I found myself posting cryptic messages on social media. Nothing obvious, just vague quotes about growth and change and deserving happiness. I started going out more with Sharon, staying out later, caring less about Martin's worried glances, and Ella's quiet questions about why I seemed different. "You're acting out," Sharon observed one night as we sat in a bar downtown, surrounded by people 10 years younger than us. "It's like you're a teenager rebelling against your parents." Maybe I am rebelling. Maybe I spent so many years being what everyone else needed me to be that I forgot what I wanted. And what do you want? I want to feel alive. I want someone to see me, really see me. I want passion and excitement and Martin can't give you that. I thought about my husband, probably at home helping Ella with her homework, or organizing his tax documents, or doing any of the 1,000 small responsible things that kept our life running smoothly. "No," I said, "he can't." What I didn't know was that Martin had been paying attention, more attention than I'd given him credit for. And while I was out discovering myself and posting inspirational quotes about following your dreams, he was quietly documenting every lie, every late night, every inconsistency in my stories. I found out just how much attention he'd been paying when I came home one night to find he'd moved his things into the guest room. "What's this about?" I asked, standing in the doorway. "I think we both need some space to figure out what we want," he said calmly, not looking up from the book he was reading. "I never said I wanted space. Didn't you?" And that's when I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd underestimated my boring, predictable husband. The folder was labeled Evidence in Martin's careful handwriting, and finding it on his desk felt like discovering a bomb in my own home. Inside were printouts of text messages. How had he gotten those? Bank statements highlighting charges I'd forgotten about, and a timeline of my activities over the past 3 months that was disturbingly accurate. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Hotel receipts from the afternoon Simon and I had gotten caught in the rain and decided to get a room instead of going to his apartment. Restaurant charges from places I'd told Martin I'd never been. Even a photo, grainy, but clearly me, walking into Simon's building. "Looking for something?" Martin's voice from the doorway made me jump. I spun around, the folder still in my hands, caught red-handed. You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention. There's a difference." He walked into his home office. When had it become his office instead of ours? And calmly took the folder from my hands. "You should be more careful about your digital footprint and your credit card statements. You had no right. I had every right. You're my wife. Or were, anyway." He sat down at his desk, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, exactly. Just done. "How long, Tilly?" There was no point in lying anymore. 2 months. "Simon Redding." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Married," he continued. 2 kids. Wife's name is Helen. They live in Westfield. "How do you—" "I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. Very thorough woman. She found out more about your boyfriend in 2 days than you learned in 2 months. The word boyfriend stung, probably because it made me sound like a teenager instead of a grown woman making difficult choices about her life. "I didn't know he was married," I said. "Would it have mattered if you did?" The question hung in the air between us. Would it have mattered? I wanted to say yes, wanted to believe I wasn't the kind of person who would knowingly destroy another woman's marriage. But looking back at all the red flags I'd ignored, all the questions I hadn't asked because I didn't want to know the answers. "I was unhappy," I said instead. "So you decided to blow up our family." "I decided to try to find some happiness for myself. When was the last time you made me feel special, Martin? When was the last time you looked at me like you actually wanted me instead of just tolerating me? When was the last time you gave me a chance to?" That stopped me short. When was the last time? I'd been so focused on what Martin wasn't giving me that I'd stopped trying to connect with him too. "This isn't just about me," I said, but the words sounded weak even to my own ears. "No, it's not. It's about Ella too. Do you know her grades have dropped? Do you know she's been asking me if we're getting divorced? An 11-year-old shouldn't have to worry about whether her family is falling apart. Guilt hit me like a physical blow. She doesn't know. She knows something's wrong. Kids aren't stupid, Ottilie. They just don't have the vocabulary to explain what they're feeling. I thought about Ella's recent quietness, the way she'd been spending more time in her room, the sleepover requests that had become more frequent. I'd been so wrapped up in my own drama that I'd barely noticed my daughter was struggling. "We can fix this," I said desperately. "I'll end it with Simon. I'll do whatever it takes. It's already ended. Helen Redding made sure of that." "You talked to his wife?" "She called me. Apparently you're not his first affair. She's gotten quite good at cleaning up his messes." Martin's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. She wanted to give me a heads up before she handled the situation. The humiliation was overwhelming. Not only had I been played by Simon, but his wife had felt sorry enough for my husband to warn him. I was the pathetic other woman in someone else's marriage, and everyone knew it but me. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide what kind of person you want to be, and I decide whether I can ever trust you again." That night, I lay alone in our bed. Martin was still sleeping in the guest room, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 3 months ago, I'd been a suburban mom with a boring but stable life. Now I was an adulteress whose marriage was hanging by a thread and whose lover had vanished without a trace. I called Simon's number, even though I knew it was pointless, disconnected. I tried his work email, but got an automated response saying he was no longer with the company. It was like he'd never existed, except for the crater he'd left in my life. The next morning, Ella came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. She looked so young in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep, and I felt another stab of guilt. "Mum, are you and Dad getting divorced?" The direct question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Dad's sleeping in the guest room, and you both look sad all the time, and you never eat dinner together anymore." I sat down at the table and pulled her onto my lap, something I hadn't done in months. She was getting too big for it, but she didn't protest. "Things are complicated right now, baby, but whatever happens between Dad and me, we both love you very much." That's what parents always say before they get divorced. Out of the mouths of babes. "Are you scared?" I asked. She nodded against my shoulder. "Katie's parents got divorced last year, and now she has to go back and forth between houses, and her mum cries a lot." "Oh, sweetheart. I don't want you to cry a lot, Mum." But I was already crying, holding my daughter and realizing that in my quest to find happiness, I'd forgotten about the people who were supposed to matter most. That afternoon, Martin's mother Glory showed up at our door. She was a small woman with steel-grey hair and the kind of backbone that had gotten her through 60 years of marriage and raising 3 boys. "We need to talk," she said, walking past me into the living room like she owned the place. "Glory, I don't think—" "Sit down, Ottilie." I sat. "Martin told me what you've been doing." Heat flooded my face. "It's complicated." "No, it's not. You made vows. You broke them. You hurt my son and my granddaughter. It's very simple." "You don't understand. I understand that you're a selfish woman who threw away a good man for some excitement." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were furious. "I understand that my granddaughter is suffering because her mother decided she deserved better than the family she already had. Martin and we've grown apart. We're not happy. Marriage isn't about being happy every day. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "That's easy for you to say. You and Gerald have been happy for 40 years. Glory laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Happy? Child, Gerald and I have been through hell and back. Infertility, financial problems, his drinking, my depression, raising 3 boys on 1 income, caring for aging parents. There were years when we could barely stand to be in the same room. But you stayed together. We chose to stay together. We chose to work on our problems instead of running away from them. We chose each other over and over again until choosing each other became a habit." I stared at my hands, unable to meet her eyes. Martin is a good man, she continued. He's not perfect, but he's loyal and kind, and he loves you and Ella more than his own life. And you threw that away for what? A few months of feeling special? You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage. Don't I? Glory's voice softened slightly. Honey, every woman knows what that feels like. The question is what you do about it. Do you talk to your husband, go to counseling, work on reconnecting, or do you sneak around and lie and break your family apart? I didn't have an answer for that. Martin's talking to a lawyer, she said as she stood to leave. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your choices. After she left, I sat in my living room and looked around at the life I'd built with Martin. Family photos on the mantel, Ella's artwork on the refrigerator, the couch we'd picked out together 5 years ago. It wasn't exciting or glamorous, but it was real. It was mine, and I was about to lose it all. The process server arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. Ella had already left for school, and Martin was long gone. His new routine involved leaving the house by 7 a.m., I assumed to avoid spending any more time with me than absolutely necessary. Ottilie Vance, the woman asked when I opened the door. Yes? You've been served. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, official and final. Inside were divorce papers, custody agreements, and a petition that laid out Martin's case in stark legal language. Adultery, abandonment of marital duties, emotional distress caused to the minor child. I sank onto the couch, papers scattered around me, and tried to process what I was seeing. Martin was asking for primary custody of Ella, citing my unstable behavior and compromised judgment. He wanted the house. He wanted spousal support, from me, since I'd been the higher earner during the early years of our marriage when he was building his practice. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Now you know how it feels. Helen. She'd been watching, waiting for this moment. Simon's wife had orchestrated my downfall as efficiently as she'd probably orchestrated his transfer to Chicago. I was just another mess she'd cleaned up, another woman who'd thought she was special enough to steal her husband. I called in sick to work and spent the day reading through the legal documents, trying to understand how my life had become something that required lawyers and court dates. The evidence Martin had compiled was damning. Not just the affair, but months of neglect, lies, and what the papers called willful abandonment of family responsibilities. When Ella came home from school, I was still sitting on the couch surrounded by legal documents. Mom, what's all this? I quickly gathered the papers. Just work stuff, baby. How was school? Boring. She dropped her backpack and studied my face. You look sick. I'm fine, just tired. But I wasn't fine. I was facing the complete destruction of my life, and I had no one to blame but myself. That evening, Martin came home with Chinese takeout, something he'd never done in all our years of marriage. He was full of small surprises lately, now that our marriage was ending. We need to talk, he said, setting the food on the kitchen counter. About the papers, about how we handle this with Ella. I looked at our daughter, who was pretending to do homework while obviously listening to every word we said. Maybe we should discuss this privately, I suggested. No. Martin's voice was firm. Ella's old enough to understand what's happening. She deserves honesty. He sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for both of us to join him. Ella looked between us, her eyes wide and worried. Your mum and I are getting divorced, Martin said gently. It's not your fault, and it doesn't change how much we both love you. Is it because Mom has a boyfriend? Ella asked quietly. The question hit me like a slap. Ella, I heard you talking to Aunt Sharon on the phone. You said you were in love with someone who wasn't Dad. Martin and I exchanged a look. How much had our daughter heard? How much had she been carrying around, trying to make sense of her parents' failing marriage? Yes, Martin said when I couldn't find words. Your mom made some choices that hurt our family, but the problems in our marriage aren't your responsibility to fix or understand. Are you mad at Mom? I'm disappointed and hurt, But I'm not angry anymore. Anger takes too much energy. I stared at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, and realized I'd never seen him more clearly. This wasn't the boring, predictable man I'd convinced myself I'd outgrown. This was a man with enough strength to hold our family together, even as I tore it apart. "Will I have to choose who to live with?" Ella asked. "The court will decide what's best for you," Martin said. "But no matter what happens, you'll always have both of us." That night, after Ella had gone to bed, I found Martin in his office, working on his laptop. "I want to fight the custody arrangement," I said. He looked up from his screen. "On what grounds?" "I'm her mother. You're also the parent who's been emotionally absent for months while having an affair." "That's over. I told you I'll do whatever it takes." "It's too late, Ottilie." His voice was tired, not angry, just tired. "I can't trust you anymore, and if I can't trust you, how can I trust you with our daughter's well-being?" "She needs her mother. She needs stability. She needs parents who put her first. You've proven that when things get difficult, you run. What happens the next time you're unhappy? What happens when some other man makes you feel special?" I wanted to argue, to insist that I'd learned my lesson, that I'd never make the same mistakes again. But how could I make promises when I'd already broken the most important ones? "I love her," I said weakly. "I know you do. But love isn't enough if you can't act like it." The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyers and mediations and conversations that felt like negotiations for my own life. Martin was fair but firm. I could have Ella every other weekend and one evening per week. I could keep my car and half our savings. But the house, our home, would stay with him and Ella. "It's her stability," his lawyer explained. "Same school, same neighborhood, same bedroom. The court prioritizes the child's need for consistency." My own lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, was blunt about my chances. "Adultery cases are hard to win, especially when there's a child involved. Your husband has documented evidence of the affair and its impact on your daughter. Unless you can prove he's an unfit parent, which you can't because by all accounts he's father of the year, you're not going to get primary custody. So that's it. I lose everything. You chose to have an affair. Actions have consequences." On the day of the final hearing, I sat in the courthouse waiting room and watched Martin with his lawyer, calm and prepared. He'd lost weight over the past few months, and there were new lines around his eyes, but he looked resolved, like a man who'd made peace with a difficult decision. "Ottilie?" A familiar voice made me turn. Helen Redding stood behind me, elegant in a navy dress and pearls. She looked like she was attending a business meeting, not the destruction of someone's life. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Making sure justice is served." She sat down beside me, uninvited. "I want to see this through to the end." "You've already won. Simon's gone. My marriage is over. What more do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want other women to see what happens when you think you can take whatever you want without considering who gets hurt." "I didn't know he was married." "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." She turned to look at me directly. "You know what the saddest part is? You had everything I would have killed for. A faithful husband, a beautiful daughter, a stable home, and you threw it all away for a man who's done this to at least 6 other women that I know of." 6? Simon is a predator. He targets married women because they're vulnerable and unlikely to make demands. You weren't special, Ottilie. You were just easy. The words cut deep because they were true. I had been easy. I'd wanted so desperately to feel desired that I'd ignored every red flag, believed every lie, justified every betrayal. "Mrs. Vance." A bailiff appeared in the doorway. "We're ready for you." As I walked into the courtroom, I caught sight of Martin's family in the gallery. Glory sat in the front row, her face impassive. Jude, Martin's younger brother, gave me a look of such disappointment that I had to turn away. Even my own father was there, sitting alone in the back, looking older than his 66 years. The hearing itself was mercifully brief. Martin's lawyer presented the evidence methodically. The affair, the lies, the impact on Ella, my pattern of selfish behavior that prioritizes personal gratification over family stability. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked at the judge, a stern woman in her 50s who'd probably seen 1,000 cases like mine. Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes. I hurt my family and I broke my marriage vows. But I love my daughter and I want the chance to be the mother she deserves. Actions speak louder than words, Mrs. Vance, the judge replied. And your actions over the past several months suggest that when faced with difficulty, you choose to abandon your responsibilities rather than address them. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Martin got primary custody. I got every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. He got the house, the majority of our assets, and the right to make all major decisions about Ella's education and healthcare. I got supervised visitation for the first 6 months until I could prove I was emotionally stable. As we filed out of the courtroom, Helen Redding walked past me one last time. I hope it was worth it, she said quietly. I watched my family, my former family, leave together. Martin had his hand on Ella's shoulder, guiding her through the crowd of lawyers and court officials. They looked like they belonged together, like a complete unit that had never needed me at all. Outside the courthouse, my father approached me. He looked tired and disappointed, older than I remembered. Dad, I'm ashamed of you, Ottilie, he said quietly. Your mother would be heartbroken. He walked away without another word, leaving me standing alone on the courthouse steps, watching the pieces of my life disappear into the crowd.